Some of the best things about Life Journey for me is the amazing people I get to meet and the wisdom they share with me. Today's guest is no exception and is a true champion of transformation. We're going to hear the story of a Zimbabwean boy who came to Australia as a 16-year-old, leaving behind his family, no money in his pocket, but with big dreams in his heart. Rugare Gomo fulfilled those dreams and is living a life larger than even he could have imagined when he first landed on our shores. Rugare's life has been led through compassion, integrity and honesty, even at times when that honesty and integrity threatened to take everything from him. In his own words, he tells us he has lived many lives and has much to share. I felt so uplifted from speaking with Rugare, and I hope you will too. He has a lot of wisdom. Rugare, thank you so much for joining me. I have been so looking forward to meeting with you today. And, I was saying to you before how intrigued I was with your website and how we could be here for 2 days, I'm sure, talking about your life and everything all your wisdom that you have to share. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. I feel exactly the same way about you. I was started because of the way you love to capture people's stories and bring that out to the world. I think you're just fantastic to do that. So thank you for using your voice and your platform.
Oh, well, thank you. And I just think everything that you have learned and being willing to share that with so many other people, it just helps people live better lives and get through those tough things if they know somebody's
Absolutely.
for them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Rugare, let's start at the beginning because you were actually born in England and you were stateless for some time, weren't you?
Yes. So I was born in England. My dad was studying theology in England in the 80s. I was born in 1984. And at that time, Zimbabwe was one of the last countries in the world to be decolonized. So imagine, decolonization was happening in the 40s, the 60s. And then Zimbabwe was one of the last countries to be decolonized. And then, of course, South Africa in 1994. So the idea of the missionaries who had come to Zimbabwe was train the Africans to continue spreading the word of God. And my dad was one of those people at that time. So he was in England studying theology with an organization called Scripture Union. And my mom was 8 months pregnant. And my dad refused to go to England unless my mom came along because he had this point of view of, if I'm away from my wife, I'm going to be having a different cultural experience. And that could impact his marriage. So that's how I ended up in England.
So did you have siblings at that time?
I had one older brother. So I have an older brother who's 5 years older than I.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. So he went with you as well?
He went as well. So then we spent only a year, 8 months. Well, I spent a year, 8 months. I think the entire family were there for like 2 years or so. And then returned to Zimbabwe. Now, you mentioned that I was stateless, and this was the reason why I was stateless. At the time of my birth, the English had changed the laws. So you couldn't acquire British citizenship at birth. You had to have a parent who was either a British citizen or had the right of indefinite stay. And then, so when we went back to Zimbabwe, I went back on my mom's passport because the Zimbabweans were now saying, I'm not Zimbabwean because I was born in England. So I was born into this world, which said, I don't belong.
So Rugare, what was Zimbabwe like for you growing up? I think you said, well, you were nearly almost 2 when you went back.
Yes. So it was... in my home, it was a happy home. So when we went back to Zimbabwe, we lived in a very high density area. So high density area means a very, very poor area, like a shanty town. And then my dad got promoted, so we moved cities. So we moved from this high density area to what we call a low density areas with a house, with a backyard, and I loved it. So when we moved there, I was 4 years old. And so that became our home. And what I loved about it was that as a family, we got to create home together. Clear the backyard. We raised chickens in the backyard. And because both my mom and dad are social workers, we were not necessarily rich. So it was very normal to sell the chickens for extra income. I would help my mom with the sewing. She'd sew bedspreads, cushion covers, and she would sell that. And I would go with her choosing the materials, helping her cut the corners of the bedspreads. People would come over or would go into the community to sell. So for me, that was my life, and that's what I knew. And I loved it because it was so diverse. And to see my mom, walking into different communities and use her voice was just something so inspiring for me, and particularly in a country where women are invisible. So for me, I saw my mom having power, and in my mom and dad's relationships, they were equal. So that was unusual. But to see like my mom having economic empowerment, using her voice, and being a child seeing that was so inspiring.
Mm-hmm. I just want to talk about you for one moment, because what struck me then was, as a child, you must have felt your own sense of power, having being able to contribute to your family, and that's a great tool to learn for later on in life, isn't it? But Rugare, I want to mention your grandmother here, because on your website you mentioned that she made sure that all her children received a good education, and you mentioned then about girls being invisible. She must have been a woman ahead of her time, because I worked out that would have been back in the 1940s. Is that right?
Yeah, so 1940s, 1950s, exactly, because my mom was born in 1956. So it's completely ahead of her time, and you could even say culturally unacceptable, like taboo. So, so for her, my grandmother was a third wife, so polygamy in Zimbabwe is permissible even up to today. And so she left her husband to go back to her village, because she thought that if she stayed with my grandfather, my mom, who is the firstborn, and my uncle wouldn't get an education because he didn't value that. So he wasn't in her way, but he wasn't either supportive either. So my grandmother then had to raise my mom and uncle like a single parent in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So you can imagine that's kind of unheard of during that time.
Yeah.
And what's exceptional? Oh, sorry, you go.
Oh no, she just must have been a very brave woman too, to do what she did and have that drive and determination.
Yes, because she herself, was denied an education. So when the missionaries came into the village, they wanted her to go to school, and her father said, no, send my son to school. So her brother, whom she was very close with, went to school and got the education. So when she had her children, she decided that that was never going to happen to her children.
Mm-hmm. Gosh. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit, but I want to go back to you, Rugare, and talk about the bullying that you endured, and what that looked like for you, why it happened, and how you coped with it.
Yes, so my mom and my dad raised us slightly differently from a typical Zimbabwean family. So after having had the experience in the UK, mom was adamant that all the children would have an education where they would have global opportunities. So in our home, we spoke English as our first language. So my brother and I always spoke English. So when I went to school, I had this expectation that, of course, everybody speaks English. We speak English at home. Our family friends can speak English and, of course, the local language, Shona. But I'd never had to learn speaking the local language because the people in our community spoke English. So going to school was such a shock where the majority of people spoke the local language, Shona, and not English, which had it be very difficult for me to connect at school. And so then the other children thought that I was being a snob or trying to be more posher or trying to be superior to everybody else because I was an English-speaking Zimbabwean, which for a Black Zimbabwean at this time as a child is rare. So then that continued throughout the rest of my primary schooling and my high schooling in Zimbabwe. And it was awful because it's like, when one gets bullied from the time you're 5, 6 years old, going to school is like getting ready to be terrorized. You're already having your heart race. And you don't even have that language at that time. It's only on looking back when it's like, wow, that was so stressful. I was definitely having panic attacks, at school and creating coping mechanisms, to survive, like trying to keep myself small. So even the person you're talking to today wasn't the person who I was in Zimbabwe. I used to keep myself small, look down, don't be noticed. And that was my coping mechanism. It's only now that I feel safe and I feel emotionally secure, I feel physically safe, that my light has started to shine again.
Did you have any friends, Rugare, at school, or you were a loner?
I love that question. I always had one friend.
Yeah.
Like typically I'd have the one friend, but my one friend was the friend my mom created for me. so it's funny. So Bothwell was my friend and his mom and my mom were good friends. So Bothwell would come home after school. So that's how we became friends in that regard. But then when I went to secondary school, it was harder making friends. So I always had this sense of being a loner. Yes, I had people I talked to, but making friends was always very difficult for me. I always felt slightly separate. I felt I wasn't fully seen, fully understood.
Rugare, you also talked about being gay, and the kids would also tease you about being gay. Did you even know what that was when you were little?
No, because Zimbabwe is a very strong Christian country, or was, and so I think for me, when people would say, "Oh, you're gay," I just heard that as you're different. So that was my interpretation. I had no conception of what gay meant. I had no idea that, two men could be attracted to each other or two women could be attracted to each other. That was not part of my worldview at all. So it was only when I came to Australia, when I was 19 years old, when I was like, I think I have feelings for men and not women. And even then, I was still in denial because I thought, oh, when I get married or when I have a girlfriend, those feelings will disappear. It's just a phase. No modeling, no nothing, no conversation, no modeling whatsoever. All I saw was man is with woman, and that was going to be my trajectory in my future.
You've mentioned to me when you first initially reached out to me, that it's illegal in Zimbabwe to be a homosexual. So what does that look like in society over there, Rugare? Because that's just, in this day and age, it's hard to believe.
Yeah. So in Zimbabwe in particular, it's two men. It's called the sodomy offense. So if two men are caught in the sexual act, they can go to prison or be beaten up. So fortunately, it's not a death sentence. However, in 2024, and I'm saying that to preserve this record, there is a movement on the African continent where many African countries are banning homosexuality in the constitution. So while countries like Australia have advocated for equality of marriage, and we're seeing, Thailand has just voted just a week ago the equality of marriage in Thailand, as a third South Asian country to do that. On the African continent, on the other hand, they're actually banning homosexuality. And this is to do with Africa becoming the center of Christianity and right-wing Christian beliefs in the country, which have been typically imported from America.
It must be such a tough thing to not be able to live your life as to who you truly are, because that's what life, what life is. We're here, we should be able to live the life and be who we truly are. So that's so it must be just so difficult, and probably is not going to change over there.
Well, and that's why I'm so grateful to be Australian. Yes, it might have taken us a while as a society, but, when we did get to have a say, it was overwhelmingly for people like me to have the same freedoms and rights as anybody else. I wish we didn't even have to go through that process, but that's part of, how society changes from time to time. And, for me in particular, what I've been learning about freedom is, I'm learning that I have to start being free inside of me, because there are always going to be many situations external to me that are going to be not designed for me. And that could be around, even education, career, opportunities. So for me, in my everyday, I ask myself, what does it mean for me to be free? And how am I going to express that? So, with my husband, we hold hands down the street, not for anybody else, but because we love holding each other's hands. It's for us. It's freedom. And I normally wear a rainbow wristband as well, in the hope that maybe another child of color like me, whether they're African, whether they're Indian, Sri Lankan, if they can see that there is somebody out there who with the rainbow flag, they can know that they are not alone as well. So that, again, is an act of freedom. So for me, in my everyday, I'm always looking at what are acts of freedom. And for you've generously granted your platform, for me to use my voice, that's another act of freedom. So this conversation could reach people, in Uganda, in Kenya, in Ghana, and we may not know it, but it can start something new because you and I did. So that's freedom for me.
Rugare, it's all about acceptance, isn't it? And it's interesting. My dad is 90 years old, and he has become very accepting of the gay community, and it's been such an interesting journey to watch him transform. And so acceptance is freedom, isn't it?
Yes. And it's fascinating you say this, Kelly, because my husband and I, we may be in a cafe, and several months ago, a tradie came up to us and he was like, wow, there's so much love here. And I was so shocked because I had this perception and a prejudice, actually, that, there's a tradie, maybe they're more closed-minded. Yet, he was the one coming to acknowledge our love. And so I also have to change to know that people are changing. And I've started seeing my own prejudices in the spaces I go where I think I won't be accepted, but where I'm completely loved. And, people like your dad um, uh, have been showing me so much love here in Australia, and that has kept on surprising me. So I've also been growing inside of this acceptance. I'm also accepting that people are open. People can change their points of view. And I didn't recognize that about myself for quite a while, but it's been a wonderful journey.
Hmm. Rugare, how did you go telling your parents? How did they accept it? I imagine that would have been a pretty tough conversation to have.
I was scared out of my wits. I waited the longest possible time to tell them, but it was, I remember it was after I'd finished university. And 4 years previously, I had the courage to tell my friends that I'm gay. So for me, it was about building a community as a support network. And, growing up in Zimbabwe, there wasn't a conversation of gay. So if I was ignorant, I was like, oh, my mom and dad are going to be even more ignorant, around these things. So when I did go to South Africa to tell my mom and my dad that I'm gay, I took a friend with me as my support person because I wasn't sure. I thought I may be kicked out of the house. This could be my last moment seeing my family.
Yeah.
I literally had no idea. That's the level of homophobia that I grew up with. And that's a common story for an African child to be kicked out of home, from them to be abandoned by their family and their friends and their community. So I had no idea. And of course, my dad, being a Christian, so is my mom, but having gone to theological school, I was like, for sure, there's going to be some sort of drama. But when it came time to tell mom, I told mom first because I thought, oh, well, because moms know. And when I shared with her, she had no idea I was gay. And she said, this is what she said, I don't hate it. I don't like it. I just don't know anything about it. And I thought that was a very mature, considered response around that. Because it's something new. Just because they're my parents, as an adult now, I know there's so many things that I don't understand. And so I felt my mom herself was authentic and open with me. So then that led to a journey of me educating my mom on who I am. I had to explain to her, I don't have a mental health condition because I'm gay. I don't need to go and see a psychiatrist because I'm gay. So I had to really educate her on that because those are the messages that she had been brought up with somewhere along the lines. And then my dad is incredible. The first thing he said to me was, yeah, I love you. You're still my son. I love you. So that was shocking for me. It was very touching because that was not the response I actually expected from my dad.
Yeah. What beautiful parents you have, and there's nothing like a parent's love. And, we hope that we have brought our kids up in a confident to come to tell us anything as well, and to be accepting of whoever or whatever they want to be or do. And but yeah, your mum and dad must be very, very special people. So you're very
I'm
lucky.
very grateful, very lucky because of course you could say they were culturally ignorant. So they didn't let culture, they didn't let society determine their love for me. And that's brave. So that situation showed me how brave my mom and my dad are.
You have bravery right through your generations, Rugare.
We've been building on it.
The other thing that must have been very brave for them was when you were 16 and told them, well, I think you were actually 14 when you told them you wanted to come to Australia. It just took till you were 16. So tell me about that, how that all transpired.
Now, Kelly, as we're speaking, I'm like, I've sprung up so many things on my parents, my poor mom and dad.
They're heroes. They're heroes.
The things I've got them through. So yes, I was 14 years old, and I think the whole story of being bullied and feeling different was the instigator. I wanted to leave Zimbabwe to find my tribe. And I thought to myself, my tribe must be out there somewhere. And I'm a bookworm, so I'd read lots of Nancy Drew books, the Hardy Boys, and then like kind of old school because in Zimbabwe the library was like quite kind of Victorian. So I read the books from the 1900s, the Beagles, the Worrells. So people who are typically 70, 80 years old understand my life because we've read the same books. So I was like, I want to go on those adventures like in those books. So I wrote to a family friend, explained our family situation, and I didn't tell my mom and my dad that I was doing this because I was scared again that cultural norms would get in the way. So in Zimbabwe, it's like children shouldn't use their voice. It's the parents, the adults, who should be having these conversations. But I didn't trust my parents would be that brave to use their voice. So I had to be responsible for my own future. And so one day my dad comes home and he's like, "What's this about you going to Australia?" And so so Uncle Andrew, who I call him Uncle Andrew, he's a white Australian. He had said, yes, I can come to Australia, but had sent the email to my dad's work because we didn't have internet at home. That's how my dad found out. So in my cheeky smile, I was like, yes, I wrote to Uncle Andrew if I could come to Australia. And my dad was thrilled for me. He was very supportive. He was all in for that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What about your mum? Because it's really hard when your kids leave home and when you're so young.
Yeah. So at that time, my mom was doing HIV/AIDS education, I believe, in Nigeria. So I remember we'd gone to pick her up from the airport, and my dad and I went to pick her up. And so just on the way home, my dad broached the topic. And, at first, mom was like tentative. But then as they kept talking, you see, I could hear my dad advocating for me. It was like, oh, yes, we know Uncle Andrew that met other Australians. There'll be better opportunities for me out here. So mom was all in as well. But the way my mom processes information, we just need to talk it all out. But it was hard. Like at the airport, my dad cried as I left. But for me, being a 16-year-old, it was goodbye Zimbabwe, welcome to my adventure. So it wasn't, as a 16-year-old boy, it's like I'm on an adventure of a lifetime. For my mom and my dad, they were in the space of we may not see our son again, but I wasn't even having those thoughts then at that time of my life.
So how was it when you arrived here, Rugare? Did you get homesick or did you just take to Australia like a duck to water?
It was a culture shock. So even though I speak English, I had a conception of Australia in the books I'd read, like Charles Dickens, which I was like, they're so old school, the books I had read. So, I expected that in Australia, when families get together, you have this big dinner together, you sit down as a family, and have conversations. But the opposite was that, you get your dinner plate, you crowd around the TV, there's little conversation. So that was like a shock for me, for things like that. But the thing that Australians always showed me was kindness and love and curiosity. And for that, I'm always grateful. So it was both ways, because at the time when I arrived in 2001, there were very few Africans in Australia. And even today in Australia, Africans and I should say Black Africans make up about 1% of the population. So we're not a big community as such. So my relationship with Australia has been one of kindness and curiosity and exchange. So it's been like educating each other. So I remember on my first day when I arrived, I was saying thank you to a person and they said, no worries, mate. And I was like, oh my God, what am I not to be worried about? I've never heard that expression. It's like, should I be worried? And I was like, what should I be worried about? What have I missed? So it was like expressions like that, which have become some of my favorites. Or like, there you go. So one of our friends started to be like, there you go. And she could say that all the time, you know. So those nuances gave me so much delight and joy as well.
Yeah. So, Rugari, you completed your year 11 and 12. You
Yes.
worked at Macca's to help
Yes.
pay your way. But tell me about how your university degree came about, because I gather that you had a fair bit of help from friends, that kindness again.
Yes. So when I finished my year 12, it was in the peak of the Zimbabwean crisis. And even when I came to Australia, my family were not supporting me. They would not have the funds. And so I had to find a way to go to university and raise the money as a 17, 18-year-old boy in a whole new country that I'd only been in for 2 years. So my principal at the school, Kingswood College, asked if she could share my story. And at that time, I was like, oh, should I not? You know, people have been already so kind. Maybe it's too much. And I was like, I have no choice. And I said, yes. And so then different families rose up and contributed thousands of dollars for me to be able to go to university. And this is the thing, like, I know in Australia, the Americans always talk about how much they give, you know, how much they're raising. My experience of being Australian is we're quiet about it. We just act, and we're just doing good works in community without having to create some big kerfuffle around it. So, you know, different families just would say, with just, you know, $500 here, $1,000 there. My biggest sponsor or donor gave me $5,000 every year for 6 years in my bank account, no questions asked, irrespective of my grades. And what that did for me, it made me feel I'm just a human being. I didn't have to prove, I didn't have to be good. I am enough exactly the way I am. I'm enough being Black. I'm enough being gay. They really built my self-esteem because I'd never experienced anything like that before. In a world where everything's about, oh, we will help as long as you get your A plus, or we will help as long as you tick this criteria. There was no criteria, but that I existed and that I breathed. That's what it is to be Australian.
That is amazing. And how do you ever repay that kindness? And I guess the only way you can is paying it forward.
Yes. It's the only way. And that's why I'm passionate. And that's why when I saw your podcast and the conversations, it's like, I've got to share my story because I want every Australian to know that they are enough, that they're good enough, you know, not to keep putting ourselves down. That the act you're doing when you give a smile to the new migrant, or you give a job, you know, to the 18-year-old or the 21-year-old, that is life-changing. And I felt it in my heart. So I just hope, you know, as a nation, we also start seeing our own goodness and not feeling that we're not enough anymore.
That is such an important lesson to remember and instill into our children, and just amazing. Rugare, I want to just touch on your health problems that you've had, and you talk about how illness manifests through, like tough times manifest as illness through our bodies. And I've experienced that in my life. So could you just talk me through your experience?
Yeah, so this was 2005. We'll never forget it. And this was when it was the crossroad. I remember I didn't want to be gay, but it seemed that I had to then confront my sexuality. So at that period of time, I just started meeting men, having sex with men, and all in the shadows. But even every time I would meet with somebody, I was still in denial that I was a gay man. There was nobody I could talk about it. And the shame, every time I had a sexual act with a man, I was gripped by shame. I'm a bad person. I'm an evil person. I'm a bad person. And it was obsessive, obsessive. And also unsafe because then I had a policy meet once, never meet again as a way to try to control, my reputation as such. And then after 6 months, I remember I was at church singing in the choir, and even that didn't feel good because it's like, if only you guys knew what I was doing outside church. And the next morning, I remember we were practicing for the choir, and then the next morning I woke up and my legs had swollen. And then I was rushed to Box Hill Hospital by the end of the day because I was just screaming because I was in excruciating pain. And then the doctors came over and they asked one of the questions they asked, sexual relations with men or women? And I was like, oh no! In my head, I was like, oh. And I whispered out, I was like, I should tell them the truth so that they can actually do their job properly. And I literally whispered, man. And then it was awful. It was awful because now I'm thinking, now there's a medical record that's saying that I'm having sex with men. What's that going to mean for my future, my career? I had no idea. I had no role modeling of gay men out there in the world. So, I was terrified. And I was put on a morphine drip and I could still feel the pain. I was bedridden for 3 months and you couldn't touch me. Anytime you touched me, it felt like you're pumping electricity through my body. Then I remember one of the appointments, I think it was the rheumatologist. They were like, okay, we're going to put you on steroids. And I was so excited because I was like, yes, my body's going to become buff. I'm going to be strong because that was my relationship with steroids. Then I went and did the research and it said that steroids were going to thin my bones. I'd be more susceptible to diseases. I'd lose my hair. And I was like, nah, no more. I can't, I don't want to live my life like this. So I remember in my next doctor's appointment, I say to them, I'm not going to be taking steroids. I'm no longer going to go on this journey. I'd rather die. And I remember choosing my death. Once I chose my death, I started getting better. And it was the strangest thing. I became free. And I remember my friend from university visiting me when I was sick. And we're not very close at that time. And she was just catching me up. And she said, and by the way, I want to let you know I'm a lesbian. And I said to her, and that was the first time I said, and I am a gay man. And I just started getting better and better and better. And it's still a medical mystery. What happened. All they could see was that my white blood cell count was high. It seemed like my body was attacking itself, but nobody knew exactly what was happening. Now, at that time, nobody asked me about my mental health. Mental health wasn't talked about. 2005. Everybody was just looking at diagnosis. Is it an infection? Nobody asked me about my mental health and well-being. Nobody. It is all
amazing.
Medical.
When you say that wasn't that long ago, and look how far we have come.
Yes.
We all know how important it is to talk about our mental health and
Yes.
to place such importance on that in our lives to live better lives.
Yes.
And I guess, Rugare, in you coming out, saying those words, I am gay, it must have been freeing that from your soul and putting it out in the world and letting go of the shame and the guilt, do you think?
Yes, it was finally, I am not going to fight who I am. I now step into who I've always been. And so it was like congruency for the first time.
Yeah. Rugare, I'm interested to find out what your take is on re-identifying ourselves. So when we're one person, and then something happens and that changes, how do you move through those times? So you went from a little Zimbabwean boy coming over here to Australia, changing your whole identity, really. So how do you move through that, and why is it important, I guess, to move through that?
It's a big question, but my experience, and I don't think there's one answer, but I can only share from my experience. I think that the world typically teaches us that we are one thing. If I become a doctor, I'm a doctor. If I become a lawyer, I'm a lawyer. We're one thing. But my experience of life tells me that I'm anything I say I am. I'm infinite. That is the missing link. So, at school, we're being trained, what's your career? And the career has to be typically for life. Or, parents are encouraging you on a very specific path. What I've been discovering is that there are many paths for me. And I've got to discover the path that are empowering me, not what is going to validate my mom and dad, not what's going to make my best friend happy, not to please a partner, but empowers me. And so I think on my journey, I've been fighting for paths that empower me. And on that journey, I may not know even how to fulfill on it, but community, this is where asking for help matters. Whenever I've gone on a path, I've always asked for help. So many people will say to me, oh, you're a self-made person, which is something that society's values, self-made, and if I dare say, it's bullshit. I'm not self-made. The person I am today is because of hundreds, if not of thousands of people contributing to me. So for example, when I was leaving the legal profession, the senior associate at the firm, a lawyer, saying to me, you should leave. This is not going to be a healthy place for you. Go down another path. He was mentoring me. The lady who helped me find got me a place at law school. She was a working mom. I had no idea how to get a place in law school. She picked me up, drove me there, had a conversation. I couldn't do any of that. I'm not self-made. People have been inputting in my life from the day I've been born. And that's what I want to acknowledge. But the part that I've been courageous about is that I said, that's what I want. I don't know how to do it. Can help, however that help shows up.
Rugare, you in turn have helped a lot of people along the way, and you worked at the Asylum Seekers Resource Centre. So do you have, there must have been some impossibly sad stories from within that centre, but is there a particular story that you would like to share that might highlight what happens there, or how we can help?
So the Asylum Seeker Resource Center is an extraordinary organization. Like it's all it's volunteer run. So I was a volunteer, and I was a volunteer lawyer for 2 years. And I chose to focus on helping asylum seekers from the African continent and the Francophone countries, the French-speaking countries. The story that really stands out for me was a gentleman from Nigeria. And this would have been around 2009, 2010. And, we normally relate to Nigeria as a stable country. And why he was seeking asylum was because he was a Christian and he had lived close to the northern part of Nigeria, where there is a terrorist organization called the Boko Haram, Islamic extremists. And we heard about them when they kidnapped the girls, and there was a whole big campaign, many, many years. even saw, Michelle Obama talking about it, save our girls from the Boko Haram in Nigeria at that time. And he had was being persecuted. His home had been burnt down by the extremists, beaten up, etc. And he was completely traumatized by the situation. Now, what was so painful was that as in the system, we had short periods of time to get his application in to apply for asylum. So imagine somebody who's come, like, left his family, part of his family, doesn't even know where they are. All his home is burnt down. He's been hunted, to be killed. I don't know how many people in Australia have been hunted to be killed. And there isn't a safe space for him. And then he has to retell his story over and over again so that he gets safety. It was awful. He was in so much trauma at that time. And I think what I just really learned in all of this, and I hadn't been trained in how to work with people with trauma. I have more training now, but I really saw that trauma comes in so many forms. I may not be able to relate. So I've learned to be kind to people. That experience helped me learn to be kind to people, because many people, even here in Australia, we may not have been hunted, but we do suffer from complex PTSD, whether it's the lockdowns for nearly 2 years in Melbourne, whether it's which I was there for the first year, or even, domestic violence, which is a huge issue. It's traumatic for our children, for the partners. We've got to be way softer, way compassionate, way kinder. So I think that's what the Asylum Seeker Resource Center really taught me is listening to difficult stories and confronting it, and realizing that even in Australia, it might not look the same way, but it's happening. So we've just got to be way more conscious about these things.
Trauma comes in many shapes and forms, doesn't it, Rugare?
Absolutely.
What ended up happening to that man?
He did get his asylum approved. So that was amazing. It was very rewarding work, because I felt I was using the skills for something that was life-changing. After so many people had contributed to me to get a law degree, and having, being one of the very few African Australian lawyers as well in the country at that time, it felt very meaningful work.
Oh, gosh. Could you share with me a little bit about the Gomo Foundation also, because that's another huge way you've been able to give back?
Yes, the Gomo Foundation. Gomo is my surname, which means mountain in Shona, but what I was using it is giving others more opportunities. More opportunities. And that's what my life is about, giving others more opportunities. And the Gomo Foundation was really there to honor my grandmother, the one we've talked about, Mbuya Motukumira, because she herself was denied an education. So my uncle, her brother, who got the education, started building schools in the area. And instead of waiting for international donors, the kids were making their own bricks, and they built their own school. And so that was so inspiring, that people were being responsible for their own well-being instead of waiting for a handout. So I was like, well, I live in Australia. How can I participate in this and make a difference? I'm not a millionaire. I'm not wealthy necessarily monetarily, but I was wealthy in knowledge. I was wealthy in relationships and in networks. So I just started sharing the stories of those beautiful girls, and people in the community rose up and supported girls to go and complete their secondary school education in Zimbabwe. And it was life-changing. One of the girls, Mali Tsatsi is her name. And we supported her from year 7 to year 12, and then got into university, into like biomedical science as well. And she came from a broken home, but she was this empowered girl. And Cecilia, we supported in university. And this is what she said. She said, I used to always think I'm inferior, but now I know I'm not. And now I can share the message to other girls. And for me, it wasn't just education, it's education and empowerment. Because you can have education, low self-esteem, but it's education and loving ourselves. And this then showed up. How Gomo then showed up in her life was when she got a job, her boss wanted sexual favors from her. She sends me a message and tells me this, and she says, I just quit my job and I moved to another city and I'll find another job. And this is inside a country where there was 90% unemployment. That's Gomo. She didn't just have an education, she was empowered. So that's what the Gomo Foundation was about.
That is amazing. So, when you think about the enormity of that, you've helped one person, and I mean, this is hypothetical, you've helped many, many, many people through Gomo, but that one person that you've helped has then gone out into the world, and how many people is she helping?
Yes.
And she's one example. So,
yes.
That's just amazing. And
yes.
just the power of helping one person.
Yes.
But I saw on your website there was a little girl holding up a sign that says, I want to change my life through me. And how powerful is that? Like
that is so powerful.
We have a tendency to think that we can only change through outside influences. But that was so powerful to me when I saw that photo and read that little sign that girl had up. And if that's what you're teaching and putting out into the world, wow, that's just amazing.
They are my inspiration. They taught me so much about life, those girls.
Yeah. Rugare, I love how honest you are. Like there's no holds barred. And you talked about getting yourself into debt, to the tune of $100,000 or more or something. So tell me about that and how you got out of that and how you held your head up high and just worked your way through it.
Yes. So this was after I left the law, and then I worked for a company and I grew it into a multinational. And I thought I was the bee's knees of the world. I was like, if I can do that, I can do anything. Ego. So I started my own company. And when I started my own company, everything fell apart. So you can imagine when you run a business, you're accountable for everything. It's very different being the right-hand person of somebody else. When it's yours, you're accountable for team, you're accountable for bringing money in, you're accountable for, doing the business development. And I was scared. I had, what showed up were my limiting beliefs of myself that I had not dealt with thoroughly. As you said, I was able to coaster in life, go to law school, get a law job. But what I didn't know was that I hadn't yet dealt with some of my own trauma wounds. So I had limiting beliefs like, who's going to want to work with me because I am gay? Who's going to want to work with me because I'm Black? Who's going to want to work with me because I'm a migrant? And those beliefs, had me take no action in my business. They were paralyzing. So on the outside, you could see I had a good resume, but my relationship with myself was not healthy. So I pretended. I didn't ask for help because I was so ashamed of people finding out that I wasn't the person I thought I was. I thought I should already have it handled. And that's a common conversation with many people starting business. I should already have this handled. But I now know, why do we think that? Did you actually go and get trained to run a business? No, I didn't get trained to run a business. I don't know why I thought that. That's the modeling out there. I got trained to be a lawyer, But I didn't get trained to be a business person. And most people in business are not trained to be business people, you know? And so, because I didn't ask for help, I borrowed money from people, credit card debts, etc. And so I thought, and I kept saying to myself, things would change. And the other part to mention is I thought being a businessman was being busy. So I would go for lots of catch-ups and have, in Melbourne is a very community-based city. So business is done a lot over coffee, but I drink tea. So you have meeting after meeting after meeting. So I justified. I said, well, I'm going to so many meetings. I'm being a businessman without them sending out proposals or bringing money into the business. So when it all fell apart, I had to confront it. It was like a coming out again, actually. It was my next coming out. I had to confront those areas of myself that did not work. So, telling my friends, telling my family, a friend of mine, a couple actually looked after me for 9 months. I had no money to feed myself. I didn't have a roof over my head, and they looked after me. And then I created a game plan, and I promised myself and my community, I said, this is how I'm going to start cleaning up my life. And little by little, I cleaned up my life. And the thing I learned was integrity. Being a man and a person of my word. Do as I say. I'll do the things I said I was going to do when they're meant to be done. And when I don't, get in communication, deal with the impact of that, and clean it up. Where in the past, make promises, oh yeah, do nothing about it. That changed the trajectory of my life forever. It's enabled me to love myself. It's enabled me to get married. It's enabled me to write my book, being my word, really treating my word as precious as a newborn baby. That changed my life.
Mm. I wanted to ask you about freedom and what freedom meant to you. And I think you just described exactly what freedom is, but would you agree?
Yes, it's interesting because once at my word, it's like we think being a person of integrity is something that's out there, like we talked about when we want people to save us in life, but being my word is inside of me. And everybody has that capacity to be that. Now, the gift of integrity, it's a concept. Being our word is a concept. But the gifts it gives are beyond measure. They're beyond what I can even comprehend. I have joy in my heart. I can use my voice. I can say I go to a therapist. I'm in a 12-step recovery program. I have no shame about that. On my word. Because even if I fuck up, excuse my language, even if I make a mistake, I know I can clean it up. It doesn't mean anything.
We all do that. We all do
just
that.
like now.
Oh my gosh.
I can clean it up, but I'm not crippled by shame anymore. I just get that, you know what? I wasn't my word. Yeah, it doesn't feel good. Let me take some actions to clean that up. So yeah, that's freedom for me.
What about prosperity?
I wrote a piece about this actually recently, and would you like me to close on a poem on prosperity?
Oh, I'd love you to. Yes.
Sure. Let me just find it, and I'd love to read it to you.
Oh, that would be lovely.
Which is one of my great loves, is writing poems, short stories, and I wrote this poem on prosperity. So this is what I say. So what does prosperity look like today? I'm 39 years old, gay, Black, autistic, a recovering sex addict, and this is what prosperity means to me today. Prosperity is freedom from labels. My labels do not mean anything about what's possible for me. I do not have any hang-ups anymore about who I am. Prosperity is not living up to anyone else's idea of success. There is a lot of wisdom from those who have gone before me, but I do not buy into anyone else's ideology of success. Not the government, not my school, no one. Success is what I say it is. It is purely my creation, and it's intentionally determined. My determination has qualities of joy, freedom, the feeling of abundance, peace of mind, the feeling of making a difference, the ability to act and respond, versus stress, anxiety, panic, resentment, secrecy, shame, confusion, hopelessness. Prosperity has the quality of owning my own time versus feeling someone else owns my time. I feel that the activities in my life are things I have created myself. Prosperity is not doing life alone. My wisdom council, my recovery program, my husband, clients, and friends, I have rich, diverse relationships that contribute to me and I to them. Prosperity is having resources that give me options and a balanced life, resources for food, health, holidays, rent, emergencies. These resources can be monetary, people, or objects. Prosperity is my ability to live a creative life everywhere. All aspects of life are creative. I'm also able to respond to life creatively. It is my ability to create and to respond to life on life terms. Prosperity is my ability to feel and experience all of this. I am prosperous. I feel it everywhere. Prosperity is my ability to return to this mindset when I forget I'm prosperous. Then I have this reflection. Prosperity is there even when things are not going my way. When I am destitute and my basic needs are not met, I still have hope. To create hope by admitting my hopelessness and to allow a higher power in. To lose hope is anti-prosperity. To lose hope is to become hopeless, and no power can change this. So my final reflection is, if I have hope, that is prosperity. When I'm hopeless, I'm dead.
That's just really beautiful and so true, Rugare. I feel so uplifted from our conversation. I just am so glad you reached out to me and that we've caught up, and I would truly love to meet you one day. And so you're a life coach, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
And so where can people find out more about you and what you teach?
Sure. So I'm a life coach and I help people from all walks of life, people who feel stuck, people who feel purposeless, people who know they've got potential but don't know how to unleash it, and even successful people who want to reinvent themselves. So people from all walks of life, moms, dads, changing career, business owners, everything. And people can find me either at my website, rugaregomo.com, or on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. So whatever your best way you want to connect. I'm very open to connecting. I love connecting with people. And, hopefully my experience can help a person just take an action towards something they never thought was possible for them.
Rugare, thank you. I'm going to go and read a lot more on your website because you have written a lot more wisdom on there, so which I didn't get to finish yesterday. So I will follow you and be very interested in what wisdom you have to bestow upon us in future years. Thank you so much, Rugare.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm so grateful to have this conversation, and I do hope we get to meet, give each other a hug.
Yes. Yes.
And
yes, absolutely.
And grow together. Have a beautiful, beautiful day.
Oh, you too. Thank you, Rugare.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching and listening to my interview. If you'd like to hear more inspiring stories, subscribe to my YouTube channel or my podcast and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Life Journey TV.